Did President Richard Nixon invite a world-famous Brazilian psychic healer to the White House? That and a lot more on today's Archive Hour. All right, everybody, thanks for joining us. This is another episode of the Cosmic Clock Archive Hour. I'm Greg Malazzi. Today, I think, unlike the first episode, this might actually go for a full hour because we've got a whole lot to get into here, and it's pretty interesting stuff. Firstly, we got our coffee. Hope you've got yours too. Today, unfortunately, we don't really have any physical paper archives because everything we're going to look at has been digitized and the physical copies are somewhere. Too much to get into, too much to find. But I've got them all here on my laptop, and what I'm going to do is when we go through things and talk about things, I'm going to bring up the image on the screen so you can see what I'm seeing. And of course, the documents and everything else will be on our Substack after this. You can get that on cosmicclock.net. Our Substack will have everything we look at here. Subscribe there. Subscribe to our YouTube. I really appreciate it. And I've got to say, even in the last couple weeks, we've gotten many, many new subscribers on YouTube, on Substack. I really appreciate that. I didn't think this would be growing as fast as it seems to be. And that's exciting, and I'm happy to be doing it and be sharing this information with you. Again, for a quick context, I spent over 10 years working on a documentary about Andrija Puharich, who was a parapsychologist, a researcher, and he left behind a lifelong amount of archives that have never really been seen. And so the Cosmic Clock and the Cosmic Clock Archive Hour are basically an attempt to get that information out to the world so it doesn't just sit in boxes for the rest of eternity. So that's why I started this. I said in the first episode, it's kind of like a paranormal ASMR, and people seem to like that. By people, I mean one person in the comments. Take what you can get. So this week is pretty interesting because we're going to talk about Arigo. Arigo was, well, it's interesting because the first episode, if you remember, was about Pachita, and she was a Mexican psychic healer that Puharich studied for several years in the 1970s. So you can watch that if you haven't seen it. And in that episode, I mentioned that Puharich got involved in the whole psychic research world, psychic healing research world, because of Arigo. And Arigo was a Brazilian healer who did the same things as Pachita. And Puharich studied him very early on in the 1960s, the early 60s, and he visited him many times in the 61, 63, and I think he went back in 66, 68, that time period. And he studied him, and in Puharich's own words, and in his own research, apparently, Arigo is the real deal. But, as always with Puharich, he's a very elusive, enigmatic figure. There's a lot going on behind the scenes with this, and we're going to get into that in this episode. So, let's see. The first thing, I'm going to give a pause right now and make something very clear. There is footage I'm going to show of Arigo doing these psychic healings, psychic surgeries, and they're graphic. I don't know what type of violations YouTube might have. I know some of this has been on YouTube before. It's not that bad. I just want to say for people who are a little antsy about this kind of thing, it is a little graphic. It's footage of Arigo doing these psychic surgeries. So before we watch the video, I will preface this again, but I wanted to just put that out there at the top because it's a little jarring, to be honest, but it's also interesting because it kind of shows what this guy was doing in real life. So the pictures we're going to show first are, I'll just get into some random pictures here. So these are all in the archives. Of course, this is a picture of Arigo. He's the man with the shorter man with the mustache. Next to him is a colleague of Puharich's, and his name was John Lawrence. And interestingly, he was working for NASA, doing contract work at the time. We're going to get into all this later. That has an interesting connection to Arigo, NASA, etc. So that's Arigo there. You can see what he looks like. Here he is again, kind of an underexposed picture, but that's Arigo on the streets. So he lived in the town of, I can't remember. This is why we do it live. So I'm just being honest. I'll look that up. I'll put it in the comments. But it was in Brazil, of course. These are on the streets outside of Arigo's office, I guess you could say. I think the story goes that he occupied this back room in a restaurant or something in this small town in Brazil, and people would line up out the door, sometimes hundreds of people a day, to see him, to be consulted by him, to get these psychic healing surgeries, etc. Here's a good picture of him here. I guess this is inside his office. Keep in mind, these pictures are all 60s. I believe this was the trip from the early 60s, 1963. And these are all Puharich's personal photographs, which I think are beautiful photos for any film buffs, photo buffs. I mean, these are scans of original slides that are all very beautiful photographs. This is, I don't know who this is, must be a colleague of Arigo's, but you can see some sort of the monitoring equipment that they brought. Again, there's John Lawrence and another colleague of Puharich's who are looking at this equipment. This must be the outside of Arigo's office here on the streets of Brazil. Here's a picture of Puharich on one of the trips to Brazil. You can see him, his family, some of his colleagues. Here's them looking like they're having breakfast or lunch. Here's Puharich and John Lawrence again with somebody here. Must be involved with Arigo. And here's Arigo giving somebody a shot. I guess that's not really doing anything psychically, but it's one of the few pictures of him, so I figured I would share it. And something I want to talk about before getting into the film, which I guess we'll just get into right off the bat because it's kind of the most interesting piece of archive we have. But at this time, Puharich had a company, and it was called Essentia Research Associates. And if you go into the grocery store, you've probably seen those big water bottles. The brand is called Essentia. It's the same spelling, same word. Puharich had this group. It was called Essentia Research Associates. And that group consisted of several other doctors, researchers, and business people who, from what I understand, got together to basically research weird stuff. And Essentia Research are basically the group that went to Brazil to study Arigo. Keep in mind, the people in this group, not including Puharich, were all very prominent doctors, NYU, Johns Hopkins. In fact, one of the people involved in Essentia was somebody named Walter Pankey. And I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his last name right, but if you look him up, he was actually involved in the Good Friday experiment that took place at that Harvard University helped back, which was essentially this idea where psychoactive mushrooms would be given to leaders of different religions, and they would get together and see if they could bond while on this psychoactive substance. It's a whole other thing to get into, and this guy Walter is very interesting. He was involved in this, so it's just an interesting point that he was also working with Essentia Research, working with Puharich, etc. And this guy Walter in the Good Friday experiment, the other person working with him was Richard Alpert, who of course we know as Ram Dass. Everybody probably, or people watching this, probably know who he is. So just an interesting connection. I'm going to bring up the film now. Again, I'm going to warn everybody, there's some graphic imagery in this video. So we'll see how YouTube handles this. Again, it's not so bad. It's just a little shocking and jarring to see. So warning now. So we're going to start the film. As you see, Essentia Research Associates, this was a film made by them, produced by them, and there's a whole rabbit hole to get into of the backers of Essentia Research, who was involved. Again, we can get into that later, potentially another episode, but this was the group of researchers, doctors, physicians, etc., who basically traveled the world to investigate people like Arigo and other strange phenomena. And this was in the early 60s. So here is the logo. So I'm going to pause this here. And I'm going to read off some of the names. These are the people who were involved with Essentia. Of course, Puharich was labeled as the president, but you have this guy Brewster, you have Louis Cortez, you have John Lawrence, who I mentioned, you have Walter Pankey, may not be pronouncing that correctly, you have Puharich, and you have George Reed. So I already mentioned that Walter was involved in the Good Friday experiment at Harvard and a lot of other things. I've contacted the first two people. Unfortunately, Brewster had passed away, but he was a doctor. Louis Cortez, I tried to contact, and he was not willing to speak about his involvement with this. And George Reed is really interesting because he's actually a world-renowned heart surgeon and was working at NYU Medical Center back in the 60s. And I'll show a picture of him here, and you can look him up. I'll put a link to him, but he was very, very famous. Had an obituary in the New York Times when he passed away, kind of pioneered a lot of things that we now do in heart surgery. Really interesting. And so you got to think, this is a guy who's traveling to Brazil to study an alleged psychic surgeon in the early 60s. And again, there's a lot of questions as to why this person may have been involved. We can get into that later. So I'm going to continue the video here. So here's the video they produced on this first trip to Brazil to study Arigo. And here are the people involved. I'm watching this in real time while we have it on the screen. So, okay, Cajonas do Campo. That's the town. I knew that. I forgot. And they says May 68, January 69. So here is Arigo, and there he is. He's hooked up to, I don't know what those are, EEG machines or some device. It seems as though they're monitoring him. And again, what's really interesting about this is just to think this group of very serious, medically trained doctors and they're taking this trip to watch this guy, to study this guy. And what they concluded, again, was that he was the real deal. And, take that how you will. There's a lot more we'll talk about when it comes to the research they did and the report they wrote up. But this is really cool footage to see. It's pretty remarkable to think this was filmed in the 60s and still exists. So here's Walter hooking up Arigo to something. No sound, unfortunately. It would have been really neat if there was sound. But there's not. I may skip through this a little bit because it's sort of a long video. So here's Arigo writes medical prescription. So something he would do, allegedly, people would come in to see him. They would have some ailment, some problem. And he, without ever knowing these people, ever meeting them, would just look at them or touch them or whatever he did and somehow psychically know, this is the problem you have. This is what you need to fix this problem. Here's a prescription. Take this, take that. He would just write the prescription, give it to them. Next person comes, same thing. Never met these people. Hundreds of people lining up out the door. And he would just kind of glance at them. He would know their issue and write it down, give them the prescription. And again, in reports that exist, apparently this worked. Obviously, Puharich and his team kept track of these people after seeing Arigo to see and monitor, was this legitimate? Did it help you? Did it do nothing? And apparently, more cases than not, it helped the individuals meeting Arigo. So now you see this line of people out the door. There's women with babies, a lot of people. Apparently he cured blindness in people. Very, very interesting. He's writing some prescriptions here. Here's Essentia Research Associates again. And we can show this later, but just to kind of... Oh, what happened there? Oh, here we go. Sorry about that, a little mix-up. So we're going to get into some of the surgeries now, or whatever you want to call them. I don't even know what to think about this, but so here's something called laying on of hands by Arigo. Again, I guess he would do this sort of, I guess he's sort of whacking this person in the head here. I don't know how that's helping, but it's interesting because you see these big mega churches now with these pastors and people who are doing crazy stuff. Did that all come from this? I mean, I don't know. But again, I don't see the current day, present day pastors doing what you're about to see. So here's an eye checkup by Arigo. And as you can see, he's sticking a knife into somebody's eye quite violently. Again, this is a bit jarring, but hey, this is the archive hour. So what's interesting about this is that I don't know how you would debunk this. I don't know if it has been debunked. I'm sure it has, because everything is in some way by somebody, but he's sticking a knife in somebody's eye here. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, he's literally jamming a knife into somebody's eyeball. I would assume there would be blood and other things shooting out. There is not. This is something, again, that they claimed Arigo would be sort of taken over by another entity, another force, and that is what would enable him to do these psychic surgery feats without causing any pain. A big thing that Puharich and their team always noted is that the people being operated on never reported any pain whatsoever. Puharich himself, as he did with Pachita, got operated on by Arigo, felt no pain, and he's using the same rusty knife. Apparently, none of these people had any infections afterwards. They seem rather calm, which is strange. I mean, if some guy were about to stick a knife in my eye, I would probably be not feeling so great about that. So here he goes again. He's sticking a knife in this guy's eye. He's wiggling it around. He's shaking him around. I mean, geez. That is rough, I gotta say. That is rough. So again, I mean, I'm skeptical of a lot of things. I'm not, jumping on the bandwagon all the time with anything. I'm completely open to hearing how this kind of thing is done, or some sort of trickery or whatever it is. It's just very, very shocking just to see. I don't quite understand. He's showing him the cataract or whatever it is he pulled out of his eyeball. And I mean, you can clearly see it's a very sharp knife. This is not, a dud here. It's a sharp knife. So, surgery by Arigo without any known form of anesthesia or antisepsis. So this is another thing that apparently he did. Nobody, again, seemed to get infected by this. He would use the same knife. It would be interesting to see or talk to people who had this surgery done. I mean, obviously that's probably far-fetched, considering this was back in the 60s. This guy seems to have some sort of mole or something. I don't know what this is, but there's a knife being jabbed into it. It's not the most pleasant thing to see, but oh. Well, I don't think this is so bad, considering there's people out there who seem to like watching videos of people's zits being popped, and it's kind of gross. I'm not into that, but that's kind of what this is. So people seem to like that. Not sure why. So here he is doing what he's doing. He's got a guy here lying on a table. So I'm going to skip around a bit here, just because, again, this video is long, and I think we kind of get the point here of some of these surgeries. He takes something out. See, there's blood there. There's the knife inside of him, and there is blood in this situation. And recall with Pachita and other alleged psychic healers, there's some sort of trickery apparently where they're able to drop in chicken guts or something that are supposed to be blood. Clearly this is real blood coming out of this guy's body. He's pulling out some weird gross thing out of his body. But this guy's got a smile on his face. I mean, strange. Here's a head one. So he's literally cutting his knife into somebody's head. The guy's got a smile on his face. Yeah. We'll just let this play out. There's Arigo himself. So, again, I'll fast forward here a bit, just because, and he pulls something out of his head. He pulled something out of his head. Again, say what you will, but this looks painful. And this guy looks like he's having the time of his life. We're going to fast forward here a bit. It looks like he's kind of pressing down on the incision he made in his head. He's pressing down rather hard. The guy seems fine. And there's the guy after all that. Looking chipper. So, strange. There's Arigo again. Oh, there's the incision on the guy's head. Pretty graphic. This looks like the woman in the picture we showed earlier who got a shot or something. I'm not sure. She's holding tweezers or something. The video is basically over. Okay, here's the knife that he used. Or the two knives, I guess. Those are the knives. And that's the end of the video. Here's another video. Nothing too exciting in this. It's just more footage of Arigo talking. Again, if there were sound, it'd be a lot more interesting, but here he is. He's talking with Puharich and the team. And we'll just show a clip of that because that's really all it is. And there's the equipment they have. So again, I'm going to end the video now. It's just him talking, but interesting to see him. So, what do you say to that? It's very, again, jarring, shocking. I mean, the knife is really in the person's eye. The knife is really in the person's head. Was Arigo a real psychic surgeon? Was his body being taken over and he was able to do this? The people feel no pain. I don't know. But like I said, this group of very prominent doctors felt the need to go study him, not once, but multiple times in the 60s. So it's just something to think about there. So what I'm going to get into next is what the sort of hook of this whole video and this whole episode was the fact that at the time in the 60s, Arigo was a very big deal. He was written about. He was always in the newspapers. Apparently, I was trying to find this. Maybe somebody else can, but he had operated. I've just heard this. I don't have any evidence on it. It was written on in the paper, but apparently he did a healing on the president's wife at the time. So Arigo was friendly with the president of Brazil. It was a big deal. And I think he grew to be a big deal because at first he was just doing these operations and these surgeries, again, in the back of a shack, essentially. But he became very known. And here's something interesting that I found is that apparently in 1977, the actor Alan Arkin, who, famous actor, great actor, won an Oscar for the movie Little Miss Sunshine. Apparently, Alan Arkin had the film rights to a movie about Arigo. I've looked into this, and apparently Arkin was interested in all this stuff. It was the late 70s. I think he was wowed by a lot of the psychic research happening. So this newspaper article reads, Arkin has film rights. Actor Alan Arkin has purchased the motion picture rights to Arigo, a book by John Fuller and Puharich. If you get the book, Puharich wrote the foreword. And apparently the story is Puharich was so busy at the time running around, he couldn't physically sit down and write the book. So he hired John Fuller to write the book, who was a sort of paranormal author who wrote a few books back then. They wrote it together. John Fuller's credited as the author, but it says a book by John Fuller about a South American who can allegedly cure illnesses without medical aid. Arkin has also acquired rights to some documentary film footage by Henry K. Puharich. Of course, Henry was the name Puharich went by before he changed it to Andrija, which is the footage we just watched. Very interesting. I think I tried to contact Arkin at one point years ago. Unfortunately, he passed away, which is sad. The article says he plans to make a film based on the contents of the book and the film. He is currently editing Fire Sale, a film he stars in and directed. So that's a little cool history. Great actor Alan Arkin was going to use this footage we just saw of Puharich's in a film, which of course never happened, but maybe that can happen someday. So here's another newspaper article. It says, Brazil's president places psychic surgeon under his protection. The eminence achieved by Brazilian psychic surgeon José Arigó, 51, is shown by the fact that he is now under the personal protection of the president of his country. This remarkable news was told to me by Dr. Andrija Puharich, whose remarkable film, which we just saw, of Arigo's painless spirit operations was shown in London. And again, we'll post these newspaper articles. I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's pretty long, but it's a pretty cool picture here. It says, Dr. Andrija Puharich listens through a walkie-talkie radio to an interpreter translating prescriptions given through the entranced medium, José Arigó, by a guide who was said to be a former German medical man. So apparently Arigo is being taken over and became entranced by a former German medical man. So that's pretty strange. Cool picture, though. So here's the big part of, well, before we get to that, we'll show you one more newspaper article here. It says, doctor shows astounding film of psychic surgery. There's a cool picture of Puharich. It says, the most astonishing film of psychic phenomena I have witnessed was screened in London last week. It depicted in gruesome detail painless spirit operations carried out by Brazilian healer José Arigó. So, and here if you look at the picture, it says this photograph was taken of Dr. Puharich after Arigo removed a tumor from the arm he holds in his head, to his head. With him is W.H. Belk, an American psychic researcher. That was somebody who Puharich worked with back in the 60s and into the 70s. But, all right, so here's what we really want to get into. And it says, let's see. Nixon invites famous psychic surgeon to operate in USA. So, let's read this, a little bit of this. President Richard Nixon has invited the world's most famous psychic surgeon, José Arigó, to demonstrate in America. The president's sister-in-law, Miss Louise Ansbury, is said to have had first-hand experience of Arigó's psychic healing powers. She arrived in Arigó's hometown, Cajongas do Campo, in January with her daughter, Mary. So this article is from 1969. So Nixon's sister-in-law went with Puharich to Brazil to witness and apparently experience a psychic healing by Arigo. That is very interesting. Again, I'm going to post these articles because there's a lot of interesting stuff in them, and I don't want to read it all. It might get a little boring, but here's something interesting. A part of this article says, jailed for healing, Arigo can no longer carry out psychic operations in Brazil. He has twice been in prison for, quote, illegally practicing medicine. The first time in 1958, he was released and received a pardon from the president of Brazil. Arigo had cured his daughter after doctors could do no more. Wow. All right. I think I knew that. I knew something about his wife, but now he's saying that the president of Brazil's daughters were healed by Arigo after doctors could do no more. Very interesting. All right. So here we have the newspaper article about the Nixon invitation, and that seems far-fetched. It's in the newspaper. There's really no evidence out there that this really occurred or that Puharich had any connection to Nixon or any of that happened besides the story of his sister-in-law going to Brazil to meet Arigo. But on the Cosmic Clock Archive Hour, we have some interesting evidence that no one's seen, and we're going to show it. So, in Puharich's archives, which we've been showing a lot of, there is a paper, and that paper was called Proposed Research into Energy and Information Transfer. And as you can see, in handwritten by Puharich, I believe, it says, by Andrija Puharich, submitted to Richard M. Nixon, Robert Finch, Clement Stone, and L. Ansbury, who is the sister-in-law of Richard Nixon, December 15th, 1970. So, what's interesting is it's submitted to Richard Nixon, right? And it's also submitted to Robert Finch. And Robert Finch was, sorry, we're looking at this in real time. Robert Finch was a close political confidant, key strategist, and cabinet member for President Richard Nixon. And he also was appointed Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare in 1969. So that's who this was given to. And also, it was given to somebody named Clement Stone. And if you look into Clement Stone, William Clement Stone was an American businessman, philanthropist, and New Thought self-help book author who was very prominent back then. And funny enough, when you look at Clement Stone's Wikipedia, he was very connected. And right here, you see a picture of him in the Oval Office with President Gerald Ford. So clearly this fellow Clement Stone could move around Washington quite a bit. Was friends with Nixon, is in the Oval Office with Gerald Ford. So these are the people that this paper, Proposed Research into Energy and Information Transfer, was submitted to. Let's get into that paper. Firstly, wanted to say thank you to everyone who is subscribing here on YouTube, on Substack. Again, a lot of new people pretty much every day. It's really awesome. I appreciate it. So share, subscribe, all that stuff. The link to the Substack will be in the description. So let's get into the paper. Again, we'll post this, and I'm not going to read all of it because it's long, but the first page, I'll read the whole first page for you because it's interesting. It says, in a world today, there are many people, hundreds with extraordinary ability, who are capable of demonstrating that they have the talent of ESP, of course, extrasensory perception. These people are little understood by humanity at large, or by science specifically. There is enough evidence at hand that the talents of such people is real, and that knowledge and control of such talents is of great consequence to mankind. The USSR has recognized the importance of this problem, while the USA has not. In Russia, Czechoslovakia, and Romania, both basic and pragmatic research is being carried out by government and universities and special institutes in fields called bioenergy and cosmoenergy. Known in the West as ESP, telepathy, precognition, and hypnosis. For the purposes of this communication, we shall refer to all of the above phenomena by the term energy and information transfer. Oops, sorry. We have discussed the book written about the experiments going on in Russia and Czechoslovakia. Many of the statements made in this book can be confirmed by documents available in USA intelligence files, such as the CIA. Interesting. So again, this paper is long, and we can post it, and we can certainly get into it. But what it's basically suggesting is that Puharich and Essentia Research and another group of specially selected scientists, doctors, etc., would basically spearhead a program on behalf of the U.S. government to study psychic phenomena, bring people like Arigo to the United States for studying, etc. And it's interesting because some of the people they list here to join this endeavor, we can look at their names, but one of them here is interesting. It's José Delgado, professor of physiology, Yale University, study of the living brain in man and animals during the act of direct forecasting. Most people know José Delgado because of his connection to MK Ultra and his connection to mind control programs, and that's something we can get into and anyone can look up. An interesting character. And also on here is Dr. Gerald Feinberg, professor of physics, Columbia University, Prometheus Project, the selection of goals for the future of mankind, theory of tachyons. Gerald Feinberg is, of course, someone else that seems to be talked about a lot in these circles. Professor Bernard Grad, professor of biochemistry, McGill University. McGill University was where a lot of the MK Ultra research came out of in Canada, so something interesting to note. A lot of other people on here. Abraham Peiss, professor of physics, Rockefeller University, mathematical models of nucleus and the cosmos. Of course, Walter Pankey, who was part of Essentia, I spoke about earlier, a psychiatrist, director of research, Maryland Psychiatric Research Center, effective drugs on the mystical states, which was the Good Friday experiment I spoke about. A couple other people, Robert Laidlaw, psychologist, New York City. He wound up working with the CIA later. So that's very interesting. So basically this paper is sort of a presentation that apparently was given to the people we named earlier in order to get a sort of program going. And it's interesting here because it says, we suggest that the money for this project should be given by the government to a private nonprofit foundation or institution. In this way, there is more freedom of movement. Perhaps discretionary White House funds could be used. The amount is rather small. It is our suggestion that probably a small operating foundation might be the best place for this money during the first 2-year pilot phase. With this in mind, we suggest the following foundations be considered. Life Energies Research, Inc., Director Robert Laidlaw, who again worked for the CIA, Essentia Research Associates, Director Henry Puharich, New England Institute, Parapsychology Foundation, Psychiatric Research Foundation, and Mind Science Foundation. And this all right, there's a lot of interesting stuff in here. Okay, this is really interesting, actually. I don't really remember this. I'm sorry, I got to sort of squint here because it's hard to read. The text is very faded. So here's what's interesting. It says, this place is where work is now going on that would be investigated might include. So I think they're suggesting what this group would investigate. And number one, the Vatican Library, through arrangements with certain priests are in training at a monastery in the Netherlands for their powers of direct forecasting. I think forecasting is a word that also means clairvoyance. You're sort of predicting something before it happens. Brazil, noted for several remarkable healers. Afghanistan and Chile, currently a center for Sufi adepts. India, certain holy men with powers. Indonesia, communities that, I'm sorry, this is a faded text here. Communities that hereditarily practice telepathy and other powers inherent in many of the people. The Philippines, shamanism and healers. Japan, firewalking in the temples of Kyoto. Mexico, plants and drugs used by the natives in direct forecasting. Egypt, fakir phenomena in animal control, hypnosis, museum archives. Russia, biocybernetics research, psychokinesis research. Czechoslovakia, psychokinesis research. China and Taiwan, shamanism, Taoist practice in direct forecasting, acupuncture practice, Taoist manuscripts, and herbals. Russia, precognition. Netherlands, only state-supported parapsychology laboratory in the world, study of Gerald Crosset's precognitive powers. Germany, Max Planck Institute, psychophysiological studies. England, research units at Oxford and at Cambridge, materialization. Science fiction writers, Arthur Clarke, etc. Successful men who consciously practice direct forecasting. Research is about to be published on the knowledgeable uses of ESP by prominent U.S. businessmen. The Czechs state that some of their most interesting work has come from re-examination of ancient manuscripts. The libraries of the world would be approached for such sources. This is a tremendous new area where the United States is considerably behind other major countries in their pragmatic, scientific, yet imaginative approach to the more sensitive, emergent phases of human abilities as yet. Unknown energies of the cosmos that may affect human behavior, such as neutrino flux. So clearly this is very interesting. The fact that this report was submitted to the people we listed above, Nixon, etc. The last page says, it is necessary to move ahead with dispatch in a creative yet organized manner with full resources. We'd like to start working out the details with you as soon as possible. There you have it. So I guess the question is, was that report ever really submitted to the President of the United States and the people listed on that first page? We don't know. We don't know. And that's something to look into. But it exists. And another document we have that touches on this is sort of a list of the people involved that Essentia Research has worked with, including partially helping with a trip to Brazil to study Arigo. So on this list, it shows the different organizations which participated in formulating this study proposal. And those consist of the Atomic Energy Commission, Committee on Aeronautical and Space Sciences, U.S. Senate, Honeywell Company, Missile and Space Systems Division, Human Ecology Fund, Inc., which was a shell company for the CIA, Intellectron Corporation, Puharich's other company at the time, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, of course, St. Elizabeth's Hospital, Washington, D.C., United States Navy, United States Air Force Systems Command, Walter Reed Army Hospital. Begs the question, what are these people interested in exactly? We don't know. So that is what is going on here today. And again, this all started with Arigo, who was the Brazilian psychic healer. We saw the footage. And again, the big question was this idea that somehow President Nixon was briefed on this, given a report. We saw the report. We saw the people involved. And I guess we don't know unless somebody out there or myself, or we keep digging and find more. But very interesting. It clearly shows that Puharich is saying, look, these other countries are far ahead in this stuff. They take it seriously. We need to as well. That report was submitted in 1970. And of course, the Arigo research and a lot of what Puharich was doing was going on much before 1970, as far back as the 1950s. So take that how you will. And we're going to post what we saw here on our Substack. And I'd like to get some comments going and some conversations going in the comments section, rather, about all this, because, again, it just begs the question. Clearly, someone was taking this seriously at the time, not just someone, many people. And can it all just be debunked? Was there something else going on here? We don't know at the moment, but this stuff exists. It's fascinating to look at. And in the meantime, we will discuss it in the comments. We'll get into it. Again, thank you. Subscribe to YouTube here, to our Substack. Follow us, share us. We appreciate it. I appreciate it. Until next time, this has been the Cosmic Clock Archive Hour. You have a great weekend. See you later.